The next one is from the comments of one of our recent videos with Steve. And it reads that basically, that obviously you require reasonable suspicion to require a pilot to land the drone. The question surrounds when should the officer explain that reasonable suspicion, and how can the pilot challenge this?
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so a couple of things to pick out here. We very often use comparisons to the Road Traffic Act and road policing, I think for reasons that everybody will understand. So this one, we generally view it that if there is a reason that a police officer needs to speak to somebody or wants to speak to somebody, there is going to be a reason sitting behind that. So they're not proactively going out to look for occasions to interfere with what pilots are doing. So I think it is worth bearing in mind that if an officer is coming to speak to somebody, there is going to be a reason for that. Now, again, if you look at strict wording of the law, this time it's paragraph 1 of Schedule 8 of the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act. It doesn't say that the officer has to explain it to the person. It doesn't say that they have to have that discussion to outline why they've got reasonable grounds to suspect. It just lays out the powers that are available if they do. Now, what I would say is that as with an interaction, for instance, on a motorway, if an officer wanted to speak to somebody driving at whatever speed on the motorway, they wouldn't look to do it while that car and the police car are doing those speeds. They would look to deal with the situation, manage any immediate risk, and that is going to mean, stopping the cars at the side of the road and having whatever discussion needs to take place. I think that can be applied quite easily to this situation. If there is a drone in the sky, I think everybody would understand the risks are higher than if the drone was powered down and on the ground. And that's the reason that the power has been given to police by Parliament. So on a reading of the law, the officer can go up and make that requirement. They don't need to explain there and then what their reasonable grounds are. I think in terms of any interaction with the public, we would always like to see officers explain why they're doing things. And I think that will be part of any natural conversation. But the time for that conversation is when the drone is on the ground. And once it is powered down, that risk is dealt with, then whatever conversation can be had, they can take it from there. Another thing I think it is useful to mention is that officers are human. They do react, they do respond to what's presented to them. So there is an opportunity for pilots to keep things nice and relaxed, nice and low key, have that genuine, interaction, genuine human conversation. It's not helpful if people go in at 10,000 feet, and that applies to the police as much as the public. But as I say, I think the best thing to do is comply with that requirement, because it is a legal requirement. Get the drone on the ground, and then any conversations can be had from there. Now, another thing I think may come up either now or later is around how people can make representations or make a complaint. So as with any use of powers that the police are given, again, as I say, by Parliament, these aren't powers that the police create. This is what our democratically elected representatives want us to do. There is a mechanism by which people can make representations on how they've been treated, how the officers applied the law or interpreted the law. That can be either directly to the force, or it can be to the Ombudsman, to the Complaints Authority. There is an opportunity to do that there. What I would say, though, is the time for that debate, the time for that discussion really is not when the drone's in the air, especially if that requirement has been made.
Okay, so if the officer, because there is that word require, of course, and I've said myself, I've been guilty of it myself on previous videos, where I say if the officer asks you to when actually they're not asking, it is it is a requirement. In terms of where that might get a little bit fuzzy, and as you say, there is the human factor in there. It is the pilot is probably going to want to verify that they do suspect something, that they do suspect that there's a crime, that perhaps the officer knows the rules well enough to know that he requires suspicion of something. So presumably, as part of that reasonable conversation, once you've landed your drone, etc., it would be reasonable for the pilot to ask and say, a bit like if I was pulled over on the motorway at some point in the conversation, I would say, can I ask why you pulled me over? Yeah.
Absolutely. No, and you're right, that is entirely reasonable. As I say, it's not a legal requirement on the officer to set out what that is, but it is entirely reasonable for the person to ask, okay, officer, can I just be clear, why have you got me to do that? I don't understand, I'm not aware. Going back to a previous point we've talked about is around the fact that the officer may well know more information than the person has about what's going on in the vicinity, whether it's threats to the public or other events going on. It's not practical for them to necessarily set all that out immediately at the beginning, but entirely, as you say, it's not unreasonable for the person to want to know what that is. Again, if you go back to the wording of the law, though, it's really up to the officer to decide the sequencing of that as it may happen.
Okay, excellent. And then, of course, if you feel that that has been carried out incorrectly, then you do have the recourse afterwards to be able to have that looked into. As of course,
I think
everything the police does is under scrutiny the whole time, of course. So
yes,
it's the right you have with any interaction with police.
And officers are quite used to that, and that's why the legislation talks about reasonable grounds, and the officer knows they have to be able to explain why they've come to that position, whether it's a belief that the flight's taken place or a suspicion that an offence has been involved or whatever it might be.